Hi everybody, and welcome to our module on antifungal drugs. I've listed on this slide the names of the antifungal drugs that are commonly used and that you need to know for step 1, but it's much easier if you remember them in a couple of separate groups. So I've shown here that 3 of these drugs are really amphotericin drugs. Obviously amphotericin is, nystatin works exactly like amphotericin, and flucytosine is a drug that's added to amphotericin. So you should remember all 3 of these together. The azoles and the ecocandins are really in a class by themselves, and then finally there are 2 drugs that are only used for tinea infections of the skin and nails, so you can remember those together as well. So first, before I get started with the specific drugs, let's talk about sterols. So sterols are steroid molecules with an alcohol group attached. This is a picture of one over here in the top right. It's got this alcohol group right here attached to a steroid molecule of rings. And there's one sterol that you know very well, and that's cholesterol, which is in the cell membrane of human and animal cell walls. What fungi use in their cell wall is a sterol called ergosterol, and ergosterol looks like this down here. And you can see it has a very similar structure to cholesterol, but does have some important differences. So the way that amphotericin B works is that it binds ergosterol, and since ergosterol is only found in fungal cell membranes, it's selectively toxic to fungi. Once amphotericin B binds ergosterol, it forms pores in the cell membranes. This leads to electrolyte leakage, and ultimately the fungal cells will die. Amphotericin B has a lot of potential side effects, as we'll see in a few slides, so it's only used for dangerous systemic fungal infections. It's used for people who have candida in the blood, that's candidemia. It's used for mucormycosis, for cryptococcus, and for systemic and disseminated forms of the fungal pneumonias like histoplasmosis, blastomyces, and coccidiomycosis. It's usually given intravenously. There is no oral form of this drug. And sometimes it's given intrathecally, especially for patients with cryptococcal meningitis. Amphotericin B has several unique and important side effects, and these are fairly high yield to know about for step 1. In general, the mechanism of these side effects is not completely understood, but many of them are thought to relate to the binding of cholesterol. Recall that cholesterol is a very similar structure to ergosterol, so it's thought that the amphotericin binds cholesterol in human cells, and that leads to many of these side effects. The first side effect is the shake and bake. This is fever and chills that people get when they're administered amphotericin. There's some evidence that this may be related to the release of prostaglandins triggered by amphotericin. So you can treat it with NSAIDs, which can inhibit prostaglandin release. You can also treat it with Tylenol and diphenhydramine. Phlebitis is inflammation of a vein. It's going to present as pain and inflammation of a vein used for infusion. This is much more common when a small peripheral vein is used. You can generally avoid this by using a central line. Sometimes hydrocortisone is given together with the infusion to decrease the chance of phlebitis. Hypotension and arrhythmias are 2 idiosyncratic side effects of amphotericin B. We don't know why they occur. They tend to occur after the first dose, and then if they don't happen, they're not going to happen. And these are why patients who are administered amphotericin B are usually quite sick and are usually monitored in an ICU. They're often getting the infusion through a central line, and they're monitored for their blood pressure and the presence of arrhythmias. Nephrotoxicity is a very important and sometimes limiting side effect of amphotericin. It's been shown to cause renal vasoconstriction and to be toxic to tubules. Studies have shown that it can insert into cell membranes and create pores, just like it does in the fungi. As a result, the GFR will decrease, the creatinine will rise. Rarely this can cause acute renal failure, and a big problem here is some patients already have poor renal function at the time they become infected with a fungus, and therefore it's very difficult to use amphotericin for fear that you'll make the kidneys worse. You can hydrate people before you give the infusion, and this sometimes helps make nephrotoxicity less likely. There are so-called liposomal forms of amphotericin B. This is amphotericin B dissolved into lipids, and these were developed based on animal studies that showed them to be less nephrotoxic, and these can be used and they have less incidence of nephrotoxicity, although not zero, compared to patients who receive traditional amphotericin B. Amphotericin B is a classic cause of electrolyte abnormalities, especially hypomagnesemia and hypokalemia. It alters the permeability of the distal tubules in the kidneys to magnesium and potassium. As a result, you lose magnesium and potassium in the urine, and so you always have to check electrolytes regularly in people receiving amphotericin B. And then finally, it can cause a very mild reversible normocytic normochromic anemia. This is usually not serious and usually does not require transfusions. In addition to the kidney losses of magnesium and potassium, there are 2 other kidney side effects of amphotericin B that are very high yield to know about. The first one is that amphotericin can cause a distal or type 1 renal tubular acidosis. So this will be a patient on amphotericin who develops a non-anion gap metabolic acidosis. Type 1 RTAs have a very low bicarb, it's often less than 10, and the urine pH will be high, and I discussed this in more detail in the renal modules. And then a second effect of amphotericin B is that it can potentially cause nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, so this will cause the kidneys to become insensitive to ADH, and thus you will develop hypernatremia. And both of these effects have to do with the distal tubule and the collecting duct, which is the same place where the kidney loses magnesium and potassium in patients on amphotericin. So you can just remember that amphotericin likes to interfere with the distal tubule and collecting duct, and that can help you remember that patients on this drug lose magnesium and potassium in the distal tubule, they get distal RTAs, and they also get nephrogenic DI. Next antifungal drug is nystatin, and this has the exact same mechanism as amphotericin B. It binds ergosterol, causes pores to form in cell membranes, and then there is electrolyte leakage and fungal cells will die. The thing to know about nystatin is that it's highly toxic when given intravenously, so it's never used systemically. It's used in two special situations that you definitely should know about for step 1. The first one is the swish and swallow for thrush. So thrush occurs in immunosuppressed patients who get candida overgrowth in their mouth. They get white plaques in their mouth, and they will swish nystatin and then swallow it, and this will eliminate the candida. It's also used on the skin for babies who have diaper rash, which is also caused by candida. The next antifungal drug is called flucytosine, and I consider this one of the 3 amphotericin B antifungal drugs because this drug is never used alone. It's always used together with amphotericin. You can think of it as an amphotericin B booster drug. Flucytosine works by blocking fungal DNA and RNA synthesis. Once it gets inside fungal cells, it's converted to 5-fluorouracil by an enzyme called cytosine deaminase. Cytosine deaminase is only present in fungi, and thus this drug will only be converted to 5-fluorouracil inside fungal cells. Now 5-fluorouracil may sound familiar to you, and that's because it's known as 5-FU, and it's also used as a cancer drug. In this case, though, it's mostly going to affect only fungi because only fungi have the enzyme to convert flucytosine into 5-FU. And once it becomes 5-FU, it can impair DNA and RNA synthesis. To understand how flucytosine works, we need to review a little biochemistry. So inside of cells, you have uracil, and it needs to be converted to thymidine so that that can be incorporated into DNA. The way this occurs is that deoxyuracil monophosphate gets converted to deoxythymidine monophosphate by an enzyme called thymidylate synthase. And this enzyme is inhibited by 5-FU, so by doing that, you block the production of thymidine and you block the production of DNA. In addition, the 5-FU can be directly incorporated into DNA and RNA, and once it incorporates, it disrupts the formation of DNA and the formation of proteins, and this disrupts all the cellular metabolism. As I said before, this drug is never used alone because there's a high incidence of resistance when it is. It's always used in combination with amphotericin B, and the main use is to add it to amphotericin B for the treatment of cryptococcal meningitis. Its main side effect is bone marrow suppression, and that's because there is some spontaneous conversion to 5-FU inside of human cells, and once that happens, this will work just like the chemotherapy drug 5-FU, and this can lead to leukopenia and thrombocytopenia, the main side effects of the drug. The next class of antifungal drugs is the azoles, and these are drugs that end in azole, like fluconazole, itraconazole, voriconazole, clotrimazole, miconazole, and ketoconazole. And all of these drugs block ergosterol synthesis. They inhibit a P450 enzyme system inside of fungi. This system is supposed to convert lanosterol to ergosterol for cell membranes, but it gets inhibited by the azole drugs. And if you can remember that it's a P450 enzyme system, then it's very easy to remember that the main side effects of these drugs are related to the liver. These drugs are going to inhibit the liver P450 system, and this means you can get elevated levels of P450 metabolized medicine, and the 2 most important to know about are warfarin and theophylline. If you remember that the azoles inhibit the P450 enzyme system, then it's easy to remember that they can cause hepatotoxicity because you know the P450 enzymes are found in the liver. Hepatotoxicity is reported with all the azoles, and liver function tests are always monitored in patients taking these drugs orally. Ketoconazole deserves special mention. It was one of the first azoles on the market, but there was an incidence of life-threatening hepatotoxicity, and it's rarely used anymore for this reason to treat fungal infections. We have newer azoles that have less liver toxicity. However, ketoconazole is a powerful suppressor of cortisol synthesis. Recall that the chemical structure of ergosterol is very similar to that of steroids like cortisol, so ketoconazole is sometimes used in Cushing syndrome to suppress the synthesis of cortisol. It's also got a well-described side effect of blocking testosterone production, and this can cause gynecomastia in men who take the drug. Let's talk about some of the other azoles. Itraconazole is the drug of choice for the dimorphic fungal pneumonias. It's also used to treat sporothrix, which is rose gardener's disease. Fluconazole has excellent activity against cryptococcus, and it's also used for women who get vulvovaginitis, which is a yeast infection. Clotrimazole is often used to treat diaper rash, which is caused by Candida. And then finally, voriconazole is the one azole that has action against aspergillus. So this can be used intravenously for severe systemic fungal infections. Ecocandins include two important antifungal agents, caspofungin and micafungin. Both of these are inhibitors of cell wall synthesis. They block the production of beta-glucans, which are polysaccharides that are used in fungi. They make up about half the cell wall of fungi. Because of this mechanism, a lot of people call them the penicillin of antifungals. They only work against two fungi, that's Aspergillus and Candida, and they're reserved for severe systemic infections caused by either of these two agents. They have relatively few side effects. A lot of people get a stomach upset with this. And then they have an infusion-related histamine side effect very similar to the red man syndrome caused by vancomycin. So patients get red skin and itching and flushing, and that is related to the infusion of this drug. The last two drugs we'll talk about are used for dermatophyte infections of the skin and nails. So terbinafine blocks squalene epoxidase. This is a very important enzyme for ergosterol synthesis. This drug is given orally to treat dermatophyte infections, especially nail infections. Onychomycosis is a fungal nail infection, and people will take terbinafine for several months to get rid of this infection. The side effects are headache. A lot of people get a headache on this, more than 10% of people. It can affect the liver and cause hepatotoxicity, so you have to monitor the LFTs. And then very rarely there are reports of people experiencing blurry vision who take terbinafine. Griseofulvin is another dermatophyte drug. It blocks mitosis by interfering with microtubule function. It deposits in tissue with keratin, and recall that dermatophytes are fungi that feed on keratin, so the fact that this drug deposits in tissues with keratin makes it very effective in treating dermatophytes. It binds to keratin and makes tissues resistant to fungal invasion, and it's often used as therapy for skin and nail infection. One of the side effects of griseofulvin is that it induces the P450 enzyme system in the liver. This means that patients concomitantly taking warfarin or theophylline or other P450 metabolized drugs can't see the level of those drugs fall. In addition, griseofulvin is teratogenic, so it's not safe in pregnancy. There have also been animal studies showing that it's a potential carcinogen, and this is one of the reasons it's not administered for long periods of time. It's given for short duration treatment of fungal infections. Other potential adverse events, it can be liver toxic, and for this reason LFTs are usually monitored in patients taking this drug. It can cause photosensitivity, so patients on griseofulvin can find that they sunburn very easily. And then finally, the porphyrias are a rare set of disorders where patients have defects in enzymes that synthesize heme for hemoglobin, and patients with porphyrias get acute attacks of neurologic and cutaneous symptoms, and griseofulvin is one of many drugs that can trigger an acute attack in patients with these rare porphyria disorders. And an easy thing that I always remember about griseofulvin to get board questions right is that it's not safe in pregnancy, it's not safe in liver disease, and it's not safe in porphyria patients. Let me just finish with this slide to remind you where these different drugs are used. So for skin and nail infections caused by dermatophytes, the tinea infections, griseofulvin and terbinafine and the azoles are the agents that are often used. If you have one of the fungal pneumonias and you have localized or mild systemic disease, so for example, if you have histoplasmosis pneumonia or blastomycosis or coccidiomycosis, and you have a mild pneumonia and not severe disseminated disease, then the drug of choice are the azole agents. And then for the serious systemic infections like aspergillus and candidemia and cryptococcus and mucormycosis, this is where amphotericin B is often used. You can also use the ecocandins in some of these cases. And remember that voriconazole is the one azole that's effective against aspergillus, so it is sometimes used as well. And that concludes our module on antifungals.